September 21st, 2020. Get your dang flu shot. If you're not feeling that pressure, you're not looking at the news or opening your phone, because that's what you're going to see every day, multiple times a day. It's time to get your flu shot. Did you get your flu shot? Hey, there's a pandemic. There's no better time to get your flu shot than during a pandemic. When's the best time to get your flu shot? Right now. Today. Oh, but don't worry. In 3 months, when you haven't got it, they're going to write articles that say, did you not get your flu shot? There's still time. Get it now. Get it now. Always get it now. Okay? Let's take a look at some of what's going on here. So, if you just go to Google News, type in flu shot, literally an unending wave of results talking about drive-up flu shots at school, flu shot here, flu shot there. When's the best time to get a flu shot? Why this year? It's more important than ever because of coronavirus. Even though there's studies that show that if you get the flu shot, you're now more likely to get coronavirus and have complications. It doesn't matter what the science says. All that matters are the headlines and the fact that they have to steer your behaviors here so that they can make all the money they want on this shot that can be administered to the entire population. That is an uncapped market. And the only cap is how many people exist on the planet and who they can actually trick into doing this. Money, money, money. Follow the freaking money, right? Again, I'm not giving you health advice. You want to go roll your sleeve up and get this shot? Go for it. What I will say is before you do that, before you jump in line and get triggered by these headlines, do your own research, okay? Because you've seen how quickly big science that's connected to these corporations can create any narrative they want, right? We know that there's plenty of studies that talked about hydroxychloroquine being an effective drug toward coronavirus, and they didn't want that to be known, so they went out and created studies using high dose causing adverse events and saying danger, danger, danger. I'm going to say danger either way. I don't think that these drugs are a great idea. I think you need to focus on a good lifestyle. You know what I say if you've heard my videos before. So anyway, no shortage of all these articles, right? When to get your flu shot? When should you get your flu shot? According to me and my research, you go do yours. Never. Never, ever. Never, ever, 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 never, ever get a flu shot. Not even when hell freezes over, not even if pigs fly, not even if Gates or Fauci ever speak words of truth. Never. Why? Well, what studies have you been reading? I love the Cochrane reviews, where they take all the existing science, look at it thoroughly, and come to a overarching conclusion about what the science currently says. Now, before we do that, let's look at what the CDC says about flu season, okay? And the burden of influenza. I may have landed on a last year's page. I don't know. Either way, it's all BS. Here we go. The 2019-2020 U.S. flu season, which we're now going into the 2020-2021. Preliminary burden estimates. You gotta pay attention to the fact that these are all estimates. Everything they do is assumptions and estimates. The numbers are total bullcrap. 39 to 56 million flu illnesses for the year, or the season. 18 million to 26 million flu visits. 410 to 740,000 flu hospitalizations. And 24,000 to 62,000 flu deaths. Is this true? How come these numbers go bigger and bigger every year? Well, asterisk. Because influenza surveillance does not capture all cases of flu that occur in the U.S., CDC provides these estimated ranges to better reflect the larger burden of influenza. AKA, we make this shit up to scare you guys into doing what you think is best. Don't believe it. Go look at the information. What do they even consider flu when looking at these estimated numbers? Let's dive into it. Cochrane Review has had 3 long-running studies on the effectiveness of the influenza vaccines for 20 plus years, okay? And they recently stabilized them back in 2018, all right? So this page is called Featured Review. 3 updated Cochrane reviews assessing the effectiveness of influenza vaccine. 3 reviews have been newly updated to incorporate the latest available evidence on vaccines for the prevention of influenza. These reviews, which focus on the prevention of influenza in healthy adults, okay, there's that study, healthy children, this study, and the elderly. And you can go in and read each one of these, and I recommend that you do. These form long-running series by the same author team and are available in full on the Cochrane Library. You can go in and read these. With the latest round of updates, the authors and the Acute Respiratory Infection Group editorial team have made some key decisions regarding the stability of the accumulated evidence and criteria which will guide further progress on updating. The authors have outlined their perspectives on the review to date and the larger evidence picture in a companion piece on the Cochrane blog. So let's go over to this blog entry. It's called, Why Have 3 Long-Running Cochrane Reviews on Influenza Vaccines Been Stabilized? This is important to read and understand how this data is estimated and created that's used to control your behaviors. Your perceptions control your behavior. So where's the information coming from that is controlling your perception? This is key. We have 3 long-running Cochrane reviews on influenza vaccines. No, why have 3 long-running Cochrane reviews on influenza vaccines been stabilized? Okay. The 3 Cochrane reviews focusing on the prevention of influenza in healthy adults, healthy children, and in the elderly are long-running reviews under the same senior author team. The protocol for the oldest review was first published 20 years ago, which would be about 22 years ago now. Over the years, the reviews have progressively accumulated evidence leading to ever greater stability in the conclusions. Stable is a publication flag that usually indicates that the results are unlikely to change with the inclusion of new studies, such as the certainty of the results. The influenza vaccine reviews present us with partly different situation though. Readers will notice important outcomes where we have little or no data. And this is so common in vaccine research, where big decisions are made where little or no data exists at all. They may also see that for some measures of influenza and influenza-like illness, okay, ILI, every time you see ILI, that's going to be influenza-like illness. Influenza is actual influenza virus causing the problem. Influenza-like illness is the actual clinical presentation, right? The symptoms and the clinical presentation of being diagnosed with the flu, even though you never got tested to actually prove that it was the influenza virus. This is crazy. We have low certainty evidence. We have reached a point where the evidence is not showing anything different to what it has done for a number of years. We know with varying degrees of certainty about vaccination effects on influenza and ILI. Again, influenza-like illness. But the gap in our understanding of how vaccines affect the consequences of influenza persists. For each review, the impact of a single study is documented in the summary table 1. Studies included in the various versions of this review and their impact on our conclusions. This month, the 3 reviews appear in their latest updated and stabilized format. Whilst we do not believe the periodic updating will complete the picture, our decision to stabilize is conditional. The 3 reviews will not be updated again unless certain criteria are met. Number 1. First, a new trial that meets inclusion criteria becomes available. Few trials, if any, of interest have been conducted recently as a comparison with an inactive control. okay, as a comparison with an inactive control is considered by some to be unethical. That is a scapegoat, a way out of doing it. In the elderly, the latest completed trial dates from nearly 2 decades ago. Our searches have failed to find relevant ongoing trials. So the safety data that we're pushing all the elderly to getting this shot is 2 decades old, more than that. A second condition is the introduction of a new generation of vaccines. If they bring in this new generation of vaccines, they'll take another look. But as it stands right now, the data's there. So this is possible given that several new technologies are being developed, such as vaccines containing fragments of the hemagglutinin antigen or stock on the viral surface, the so-called stock-specific vaccines. If they roll those out, they'll take another look. And then the third and final condition is more complex. Just one second, let me make sure I'm not missing any important message from family. Okay. The third condition is more complex. The development and testing of a new causal paradigm for influenza-like illness and influenza. Currently, massive worldwide machinery is needed to produce new vaccines every year to address the viral antigenic changes and to address the poor persistence of the antibody response in individuals. However, the vaccination selection and production programs are based on ideological assumptions which are neither explanatory nor predictive, as shown in our reviews. Overall, the largest data set to have accumulated to date is from trials conducted in the population least likely to benefit from vaccines, but most likely to produce immunity, and that is in healthy adults. That's where the majority of the science lies, is in healthy adults. Okay, so again, it's coming from programs based on ideological assumptions. Hold on. Yeah, okay. From trials conducted in the populations least likely to benefit from the vaccine, but most likely to produce immunity, healthy adults. So in healthy adult trials, a high serological response is matched by a very small clinical effect. And all that data shows 71 healthy adults would need to be vaccinated to prevent one of them from experiencing influenza. This weak effect cannot be explained simply by the mismatch of vaccine antigens with wild viral ones. A larger effect is observed in children over the age of 2, where 5 children would need to be vaccinated to prevent one case of influenza, although there is huge uncertainty around these estimates. There is little evidence on prevention of complications, transmission, or time off work. Other reviews have drawn similar conclusions. Which conclusions? That there's little evidence on the prevention of complications, transmission, or time off work. They don't do much at all. During stabilization, we updated the randomized evidence, but for the first time have decided against updating the large observational evidence base. The observational dataset still appears in the review, but only as a historical record of earlier versions. Observational studies were included in the review over a decade ago in the hope that they could provide long-term and rare harms data and improve the external validity of the trial evidence. They turned out to be of such low quality that their conclusions were inconclusive or unreliable. This is the science that they're telling you is settled and that you need to go out and get the shot. Low quality, inconclusive, and unreliable. The most important example is the case-negative study to assess influenza vaccine effectiveness post-hoc, i.e. after an influenza season, by harvesting data from the surveillance program. Now this study design, which is similar to a case control study, selects influenza cases, which are cases of influenza-like illness, which have tested positive for influenza. So these are clinically tested positive for influenza. And control cases of ILI where they presented symptoms but did not have influenza. Okay? The controls had ILI but tested negative. and then calculate the relevant odds ratio, the OR, the odds ratio of exposure to that season's vaccine. That's how it should be done, but it's not. An estimate of vaccine effectiveness is derived from this odds ratio using a standard formula. Vaccine effectiveness equals 1 minus the OR percentage. However, despite their institutional popularity, case-negative designs have limited public health significance because the design does not test field effectiveness. Okay? They're just getting laboratory numbers and then applying that to the world. But rather, it relies on laboratory efficacy of the vaccine, the capacity of the vaccine to generate a negative polymerase chain reaction, or a PCR result. And you've seen how these tests are leveraged to do whatever they want. They can create false positives. It causes they're not a reliable way of doing this, right? Both cases and controls were symptomatic, but only one group actually had influenza. The other group had the same symptoms, but it was caused by something else. So any prevention is solely focused on PCR negativity. In addition, no public health absolute measures of effect can be derived, such as absolute risk reduction and its reciprocal number needed to vaccinate to prevent one case. Because the background rates of infection in viral circulation are not part of the calculation of the estimates of the effect. There are also problems with the mathematical assumptions made in these designs. For details, go see the reviews, but case-negative studies are an illustration of the narrow and retrospective focus on influenza viruses at the expense of the overall influenza-like illness, the illness cluster of interest to patients and their clinicians. Retrospective calculations of relative estimates of a laboratory efficacy can be of interest for future decisions on composition of vaccines, but their relevance to everyday decisions seems questionable. Now, this is where things get really important. The underlying assumption that influenza vaccine does not affect the risk of non-influenza is contradicted by a recent report from the follow-up of a trial by Colling et al. 8, you can go reference this. In 115 participants, those who received the trivalent influenza vaccine had a higher risk of acute respiratory infection associated with confirmed non-influenza respiratory virus infection, which means those that got the trivalent vaccine were now 4.4 times higher to come down with some other type of non-influenza respiratory virus infection compared to the placebo recipients. So you are actually more likely to become sick. It just wasn't specifically from the flu. You're confusing your immune system, you're throwing it off kilter, and now you're more susceptible to other illness. The main agents were mainly rhinoviruses as well as the Coxsackie echovirus. Influenza-like episodes occurred shortly after the peak of influenza activity. Another reason not to do it. Current yearly registration of candidate influenza vaccines is based on their ability to trigger a good antibody response. But antibody responses are poor predictors of field protection. Again, antibody responses are poor predictors of field protection. This is another example of the use of surrogate outcomes in biomedicine where effects on clinically important outcomes remain unmeasured or unproven from randomized trials. Complications and death by influenza. None of the data that they put in your face is measured or proven. None of it. The simple answer to that, we do not understand what the target is. What is the threat of influenza and what can we ever expect of the vaccines? Well, the WHO Global Influenza Program and the Global Influenza Surveillance Response System is a complex network of 143 national reference centers and specialist laboratories in 113 states carrying out surveillance of circulating influenza viruses. The GISRS was derived and developed to guide annual influenza vaccine production, and the emphasis is mainly on influenza viruses, their variants, and emerging strains. However, there is no reliable system to monitor and quantify the epidemiology and impact of influenza-like illness, the syndrome that presents clinically. Few states produce reliable data on the number of physician contacts or hospitalized cases due to ILI, and none tie these data to the proportion of ILI caused by influenza. They're two separate things, guys. ILI does not equal influenza, but the numbers incorporate all of that in one. We do not know for certain what the impact of influenza-like illness is, nor the impact of the proportion of the ILI caused by influenza. Prospective studies apportioning positivity to the scores of viruses probably causing ILI are rare. As interest is focused on influenza, the standard quoted figure of 36,000 yearly deaths, which you now see has been inflated to between 24 and 62,000, which I think now the 2021 data is even higher than that. It's like 36,000 to 75,000. They just keep moving it up. The standard quoted figure of these 36,000 deaths in the U.S. is based on this, and let this sink in. It's not based on flu. Is based on the respiratory and circulatory deaths category. The entire category of respiratory and circulatory deaths. This includes all types of pneumonia. It includes secondary to meconium ingestion, as well as bacterial causes. So they're blowing up these numbers, taking an entire category of both viral and bacterial infections and calling it flu. Get your flu shot to prevent this. And this is why so many people continue to get sick, because it doesn't work, and they're trying to sell it to you based on fraudulent data. Unless you look deeper yourself and understand, where are they pulling these numbers out of? From thin air? Partly, and partly just combining other issues into one basket. Now get this. More recently, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have proposed estimates of impact ranging between 3,000 and 49,000 yearly deaths. And that number's gone up. When actual death certificates are tallied, influenza deaths on average are little more than 1,000 yearly. So the actual threat is unknown, but likely to be small. And so is the estimation of the impact of vaccination. Unknown, but likely to be small. The uncertainty over the etiology of influenza-like illness, its capricious nature, and the weak correlation between immunity and protection point to possible causal or concurrent factors in the genesis of both ILI and influenza. In other words, virus positivity may only be one of the factors necessary for a case of influenza or ILI to manifest itself. Of course, because it comes down to the terrain of the host and their own individual susceptibility. The shot isn't going to change that. We wait to see whether anyone has the interest or the courage to develop effective ways to control upper respiratory viral syndromes. Meanwhile, our reviews will remain as a testimonial to the scientific failure of industry and government to address the most important clinical outcomes for patients. One more time. Meanwhile, our review will remain as a testimonial to the scientific failure industry and governments to address the most important clinical outcomes for patients. What do they mean up here when it says actual death certificates are tallied? Influenza deaths on average are little more than 1,000 a year? Well, similar to how they're doing this with the coronavirus and saying to the doctors, just put coronavirus. If you think it had anything to do with coronavirus, put it on the death certificate. Well, that's a new strategy. In the past, media will say flu deaths are out of control, and the CDC will say flu deaths are out of control. But in reality, on the actual death certificate, it's around 1,000 a year where influenza is actually tested as the positive causal illness related to that death. Isn't that interesting? Where does that come from? comes from Influenza, a study of contemporary medical politics. Medical politics, we're all getting real used to it. Comes from MIT Libraries. It says down here, Chapter 4 analyzes official scientific claims regarding influenza and argues that the degree to which influenza is a serious public health problem is actually unclear. Furthermore, influenza vaccines' effectiveness has been vastly overstated. Predictive models of pandemic influenza are demonstrably flawed, and officials conflate the true influenza with influenza-like illness, an often overlooked but critical distinction which allows officials to mislead the public into holding false assumptions about the potential benefits of influenza vaccine. Boom. True influenza, officials conflate true influenza with influenza-like illness, an often overlooked but critical distinction which allows officials to mislead the public into holding false assumptions about the potential benefits of influenza vaccine. You are being lied to every day to buy into this medical system of lies and deceit so that they can profit off of your back, off of your body, and poisoning you. And what's worse is that they will tell you pregnant women should get shots. You can go to the CDC website and they'll talk to you about how to address the concerns of pregnant women have about the influenza vaccine and the safety on themselves and the unborn child. And they'll go in here and they'll link you to the studies that support their narrative, right? Like this one. Association of spontaneous abortion with receipt of inactivated influenza vaccine. They go through in here and say it's safe. Spontaneous abortion was associated with the influenza vaccine in the preceding 28 days. But the association was significant only among women vaccinated in the previous influenza season, containing the PH1N1. Anyway, it says that, yeah, it happens, but we're going to do it anyway. Well, what does newer science say for these poor pregnant women and these babies? Here's one from a year ago, November 2019. Influenza vaccination of pregnant women and serious adverse events in the offspring. Let's just hit the abstract. Pregnant women, I encourage you guys to go read this. Pregnant women are increasingly considered a priority group for influenza vaccination because they are easily persuaded by fear because they want to protect their baby. And so all they have to have is an authority figure telling them, oh, if you don't do this, something bad could happen, even though they don't look at what bad could happen if you do it. The evidence in favor relies mainly on observational studies, which are subject to the healthy vaccine bias. Propensity score methods sometimes applied reduce but cannot eliminate residual confounding. Meta-analysis of observational studies show relative risks far from the threshold that would confirm the efficacy of universal vaccination for pregnant women without needing randomized controlled trials. Critical articles have shown that in the 4 randomized controlled trials investigating the outcome of the vaccination, there was a tendency towards higher offspring mortality, higher deaths. In the largest randomized controlled trial, there was a significant excess of presumed serious neonatal infections and also significantly more serious adverse events. Many widely acknowledged observational results about hormone-replacing therapy, vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, etc. were confuted by randomized control trials. Therefore, the intentional drive to consider this vaccination a standard of care is not justified yet, even though it is considered a standard of care and something they push on every pregnant woman. Moreover, there is the risk of precluding further independent randomized controlled trials for ethical considerations, so as to not deny the benefit of influenza vaccine to pregnant women of a control group. Instead, before promoting national campaigns for universal vaccination in pregnancy, further large independent and reassuring randomized controlled trials are needed, even braving challenging a current paradigm. Until then, influenza vaccination should be offered to pregnant women only once open information is available about the safety uncertainties to allow truly informed choices and promoting all other protective behaviors. That statement applies to every vaccine. There is no informed consent these days. That's why you have to do your own research. Doctors are not going over the true risks with you when they give you that stupid VIS pamphlet. Goes over nothing. What serious adverse events? Let me just do a control. Let's look here. Oh my heck. In placebo-controlled, randomized control trials, the best evidence showed very modest efficacy of vaccination at the population level, if any, right? And an excess of maternal local adverse effects. Moreover, in the influenza vaccinated women, the offspring mortality tended to be higher than in the control group. The overall serious adverse events tended to be more numerous, as summarized in an infographic. In the larger randomized control trials, the excess of serious adverse events in the offspring was statistically significant. According to my personal calculations, the number of live births per vaccine group was 2,064 in vaccinated women, 2,041 in the activated control group. The total serious adverse events were 225. That's almost 11%, and 175 respectively. Therefore, the RR is 1.27. A sensitivity analysis can exclude from the SAE count the major congenital malformations not correlated with vaccination. The analysis again shows a significant excess of serious adverse events in the vaccinated group. You guys got to go through and read this information. Conclusion. The randomized control trial is available today raised safety signals of possible life-threatening events in the offspring of influenza vaccinated pregnant women. Before promoting universal vaccination in pregnancy, further large independent and reassuring randomized control trials are needed, refraining from substantiated ethical reasons for not allowing them. The safety variables to assess are all the solicited adverse events, which with special attention to severe adverse events in a wide time window, plus many years of follow-up after that double-blind interruption in order to detect even subtle differences in any direction emerging in the long term. Meanwhile, vaccination could be offered to pregnant women, informing them in a balanced way, which will never happen, including the fact that the majority of influenza-like illness are not caused by influenza viruses at all, to allow real informed choice and consent. The statement that the offspring of unvaccinated mothers could suffer severe consequences should be avoided or balanced, since the current randomized control trials show that even the opposite might be true. Moreover, other protective behaviors previously detailed should also be promoted, like a proper diet, avoiding toxins, living responsibly. What were some of the numbers that came out of the surveillance of adverse events after seasonal influenza vaccine? Okay. We identified 671 reports after seasonal influenza vaccine were administered to pregnant women, 544 after the inactivated, and 127 with the activated. Serious events occurred among 61, that's 11.2% in the inactivated group. Among reports with trimester information, the inactivated was administered during the first trimester. Around 30, almost 40% of them, it was in the first trimester. And the inactivated reports, the most frequent pregnancy-specific adverse event was what? Spontaneous abortion in 11.4% of those, followed by stillbirths, and then followed by preterm delivery. And yet, in the end, they're going to say, well, let's go ahead and keep doing it. My goodness. Do your own research. These numbers, totally made up. They don't know that influenza has to do with what even percentage of these numbers. It's all bull crap. Do your own research. Make your own decisions. Protect your body. Oh my gosh, what am I doing? Protect yourself by living clean, avoiding toxic exposures, using natural detergents, avoid fragrance, avoid toxins, avoid pesticides, avoid injection, avoid medications. Live right. Okay? That's hard for some people because we've been conditioned to live a toxic deficient life. Toxic being poison, deficient being no nutrition. We need to flip it around. We need to live a clean, nutrient-rich life. Responsible with our diet choices, responsible with when we eat, responsible. And you have to actually learn how to do that and study for yourself. And you can do it. You're super smart. All of us are. Some of us take longer to learn and retain the information. I'm one of those people. I have to read things and learn long form, and my memory isn't as good as my siblings. They have solid memories. I have to learn things over and over and over and over again before it really sinks in. So doing these videos are for myself mostly, because I read through it and I go, okay, yeah, this is kind of the message I want to give out there. And then I go through it again and I learn more. And then I probably watch it back and go, wow, I learned more even watching my own video back. So get out there and learn and teach and share and grow and help others be the best they can be. Don't rely on these interventions, okay? Rely on yourself and your own self-discipline and your own desire to be the very best so that you can take care of your family and help them be the very best. That's the goal. And I know you can do it. And we can all do it together by supporting each other. Okay? Flu shot, not the answer. None of these vaccines are. And that's my opinion on the information that I've spent time reviewing over the past 6 years. Now it's up to you to go do the same. And those of you that have done it and are out there teaching, that's awesome. I've probably learned from you along the way. So thank you. Thank you very much. Now let's all do this together. Love you guys. Bye.